It is Sunday school, and it's Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day. 2022. Wow. My mother was born in 1913. Okay. But anyway, we talked about her yesterday. So we paid her homage yesterday. So it's Mother's Day and it's Sunday school. So what more appropriate subject to talk about when talking about Mother's Day on a Sunday is exorcism. So, it'll come in handy. Okay. Yes, we are going to talk about exorcism, and I guess it was the caprice of the moment that inspired me. A God whispered in my ear and said, "Speak to them about exorcism," uh, and I do that best in this particular book here, the book that has that lovely, very whimsical almost picture of a demon there. And the good folks at Llewellyn were brilliant enough when they designed this cover to kind of subliminally put a brain there with labels indicating different sections of the brain. And that's sort of in paying honor to the quote from Aleister Crowley saying that the Goetic spirits are portions of the human brain. It was, I wish I would have thought of that for that cover. But anyway, I'm going to read to you from Low Magic about exorcism in particular. And if you have this book, you could be reading along with it's chapter 13 called The Exorcism of Our Lady of Sorrows. Now, I'm not going to be able to finish it today because it's kind of a lengthy chapter, and it'll take probably 2 or perhaps even 3 installments. With your permission, of course. It won't be Sunday school anymore, but hopefully it'll be through by next Sunday school. Now, we've discussed this before in years past, but for those of you who would like a review or are hearing it for the first time, here it is. Chapter 13, Exorcism of Our Lady of Sorrows. Part 1, A School Possessed. The little epigram is from St. Teresa of Avila. I don't fear Satan half as much as I fear those who fear him. Wow. I could just stop right there. That's the lesson of the day. I don't fear Satan half as much as I fear those who fear him. Perhaps the most dramatic example of low magic, at least as we are defining the term in this book, is the art of exorcism. Exorcism reaches back into prehistory, and together with rites of fertility and the hunt, vies for the title of humanity's oldest spiritual practice. Writing about exorcism is in its own way as dangerous as exorcism itself, perhaps more so, as there is so much opportunity for serious misunderstanding. Not to mention all the evils ignorance and fear can visit upon the superstitious humanity. For young magicians, dabblers, and dilettantes, The fantasy of waging magical war with a hideous demon who has taken up residence in some tormented soul reeks with the prospect of heroism, spiritual romance, and adventure. In truth, more often than not, where the subject of exorcism is concerned, the whole sad business simply reeks. As I feel I must keep reminding you, I am not a mental health expert, nor do I have a degree in psychology. So please understand that my opinions on this subject are drawn purely from a magical perspective and from my experience with individuals who have solicited my advice and or assistance, some of whom I felt actually needed an exorcism, though most of whom I believe did not. Let's bear in mind that the science of mental health is still in its infancy, and that in centuries past, maladies such as epilepsy, schizophrenia, depression, dissociative identity disorder, also known as multiple personality disorder, and countless other conditions, both mental and physical, were believed to be the result of supernatural causes. The ancient physicians who attributed certain physical and mental abnormalities to demon or spirit possession might not have been so far off the mark, especially when we remember that their patients' spiritual reality included a solid belief in spirit illnesses and demon possession. Even today, rather than viewing a disease as our body's natural reaction to an unhealthy lifestyle, chemical or biological poisoning, or an inherited abnormality, we apply a personal face to the malady as a malicious enemy that needs to be resisted and battled and defeated. How often do we hear when someone famous passes away, they said, he lost his 8-year battle with cancer or 8-year battle with this or that, as if it was a fight. A wise witch doctor, shaman, or physician of old knew that if one could first heal the mind, the body would likely follow. If in the patient's mind the illness could be simply personified as a common garden variety demon, a bothersome pest that could be driven off by a skilled exorcism or a skilled exorcist, then the immense negative energy of the patient's own fear and superstition could be turned back upon itself and used as a positive force to alleviate the illness. Inspired by healings chronicled in the New Testament, modern faith healers still effectively apply variations of this prehistoric art upon ailing members of their flocks whose spiritual worldview is similarly superstitious, simple, and absolute. In this place, however, I'm not going to regale you with tales of exorcisms or faith healing, or even exorcisms in which and whereby an alleged discarnate entity or spiritual force is driven from the body and mind of an afflicted individual. Instead, I'm going to share with you the story of the exorcism of a school whose faculty and students were visited by a disturbing string of tragedies. It'd be improper, indeed unwise, for me here to reveal the actual name of the school. And I got a footnote here. It says, I will call it Our Lady of Sorrows. That is not, however, actually the name of this historic school I'm talking about. Unwise for me to actually reveal the name of the school or the city or the state where it's located. I will tell you that it is an archdiocesan. I'm not sure how you would have that roll off the tongue. Archdiocesan high school for girls that has been administered for more than 100 years by a particular group of Dominican sisters. And that I was retained by the principal of the school, who I will refer to as Sister Martha, under the circumstances which I am now about to relate. And is that it for? No, we've got more time. Before I go any further, however, I must pause and remind the reader that the Roman Catholic Church has a formal rite of exorcism that in rare occasions and under the direction and authority of a bishop is performed to cast out demons and evil spirits, a la the popular film The Exorcist. Now, I've got a couple footnotes here. The liturgical text of the exorcism in the Roman ritual was written in 1614. It was revised following the Vatican Council II, a new rite for exorcism of the Roman ritual as presented by Cardinal George Medina in 1999. So they've already got one. There are several reasons the rite is so infrequently employed today. One of them likely being that the modern church's discomfort with something that appears so embarrassingly medieval. With another being the miles of ecclesiastical red tape involved in proving to the church's satisfaction the necessity for such a radical confrontation with the Prince of Darkness. The criteria for such proof are very specific and involved. If, however, the evidentiary hurdles are cleared, it can take an additional time to find a bishop willing to authorize the procedure, and if the bishop is unable or unwilling to do the job himself, to find an exorcist capable and willing to perform it. It often takes years to get a first-rate Roman Catholic exorcism on the road. More often than not, by then the possessee has gotten better or has died most colorfully. Before the exorcist walks out of the theatrical fog and comes knocking at the door. The reason a bishop is required to perform or order an exorcism springs from the Christian tradition that bishops are supposedly possessed with a kind of magical electricity that evil spirits hate, fear, and cannot resist. The Church, of course, doesn't refer to this power as being magical, but when they describe the nature of this force, that one can conclude it can be nothing else but magical. They maintain that this current is passed from individual to individual by the laying on of hands with full intent to transmit it. In other words, one bishop makes another bishop by laying his hands on another man, and in those days it was a man, and saying something to the effect of, John Doe, it is my intention to make you a bishop. And so I'm going to lay my hands on you and pass some of my magical electricity on to you. It's okay, I can make more. Supposedly, this magical juice comes down directly through an unbroken chain of guys who were touched by a guy who was touched by a guy who was touched by a guy who was touched by a guy, etc., 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 back to the first century to a guy who was touched by a guy who was touched by St. Peter. Please don't think that I'm being unreasonably disrespectful. I mean it, I'm not. But when I observe that Peter, despite his other admirable spiritual qualities, was, according to the Gospels, probably the stupidest disciple of Jesus. How stupid was he? He was so stupid that during a rare outburst of exasperation, Jesus called him a rock. Contrary to the absurd interpretation concocted in the Dark Ages by an understandably confused and embarrassed church, calling someone a rock in the first century, in first century Palestine, was not a compliment. In Aramaic, rock is the most insulting epithet. It doesn't mean, "Hey, I think you're heavy, man." It means, "I think you're an idiot, as dense and stupid as a stone." Jesus goes on to say something to the effect that it would be on such an immovable rock that the whole future of the church would be built. Obviously, in this instance, Jesus is proven to be a great prophet. This chain of magical electricity from St. Peter to the modern bishop is called apostolic, as in apostle, succession. Like electricity, the power, real or imagined, is in itself neutral. Once you have it, you have it. It cannot be taken away. If the church dared to admit such power could be taken away, they would have to also conclude that it wasn't all that powerful in the first place. Ultimately and technically, one's membership in the church, indeed any church, has nothing to do with it. Faith or morality or personal piety or virtues have nothing to do with it. If you were touched by a person that has it, and if they touched you with full intent to pass it on, then you have it too. Just like cooties. I realize that all this talk of bishops and magical electricity might seem a departure from the more colorful subject of this chapter, but I want you to know about this so that you may understand one of the reasons I was retained to exercise a Roman Catholic school. The fact is that even though I am not a Roman Catholic or an Orthodox Christian, I possess the bishop cooties too. The circumstances that conspired to confer this curious distinction upon me are interesting, but I would take us even farther afield from the subject of this chapter. Suffice to say that I am a bona fide bishop, possessed of legitimate apostolic credentials from at least 30 lineages traceable to St. Peter, or one of the other apostles of Christ. Now, I say see Appendix 2 here. Those of you who for whom such things matter will be interested to know that consecrations to which I refer in this place come from apostolic lines other than those I possess through my capacity as Archbishop of Ecclesiastica Catholica, the ecclesiastical arm of Ordo Templi Orientis. Most of them come from other lines. Okay, and at the appendix of the book here, I've got a full chapter showing the line going back to St. Peter from one of these 30 branches, okay? Plus the dates of the consecrations of each individuals. Like St. Peter became Bishop of Rome in 38 AD. Peter consecrated Linus in 67, who in turn consecrated Ancletus or Cletus, who consecrated, okay, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the dates all the way through to the 20th century, okay? If you think that's important, there's a paperwork for it. Okay, I think it's important for you to know, however, that I do not believe that being so consecrated imbues me or anyone else with extraordinary spiritual merit or magical power. Like anyone else on this planet, any virtues or magical powers I may or may not possess are born of the caprice of my inherited destiny and my own efforts towards spiritual evolution. I'm going to say that again. Like anyone else on this planet, any virtues or magical powers I may possess or may not possess are born of the caprice of my inherited destiny and my own efforts toward spiritual evolution. They are certainly not the result of being touched by a long string of guys who were originally touched by Peter the Idiot. Sister Martha's spiritual worldview, on the other hand, obliges her to believe otherwise. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Here's how the events unfolded. I began with a conversation with my brother Mark. I began with a conversation my brother Mark had while giving a healing treatment to his Reiki instructor. For reasons even Mark can't explain, he is a naturally powerful healer. He's since passed away. Please see the appendix for more background information on Mark's unique ability. I tease him that his chi basket is broken and he spills subtle energy everywhere he goes. Be that as it may, whenever his teacher falls ill, Mark is the only practitioner he allows to work on him. During the course of the treatment, Mark's teacher mentioned that his sister is a Dominican nun, Sister Martha, and that she is the principal of Our Lady of Sorrows High School in a nearby city. It is one of the oldest Catholic girls' schools in the state. She had recently complained to him how psychically unhealthy the old school building seemed to feel, and asked him if he knew someone who might come in and give the building a good spiritual cleansing. He told his sister that he did indeed know someone whom he believed radiated an extraordinary amount of good energy, and recommended she contact Mark. Now, footnote. You might think that this conversation sounds very new agey and subjective, but let's remember these two siblings grew up in an environment that allowed one to become a Catholic nun and the other a New Age healing practitioner. Sister Martha called Mark, and he agreed to come and give the school a good once-over. Several nights later, he was left alone in the building for the entire night. He systematically walked through and cleansed each room on every floor. It was nearly dawn before he finished. Sister Martha contacted him several days later and thanked him for adding that the building felt much better. That seemed to be that. And Mark didn't hear from Sister Martha until she called him again a little over a year and a half later to tell him that something terrible was happening at the school. She went on to describe a string of misfortunes and tragedies that had befallen the staff, faculty members, and their families in the last 30 days. It started with a car crash in which a young administrative assistant and her baby were burned to death. A few days later, a teacher, a man in his late 40s, announced he had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. He died within a week. The maintenance man severed a finger. The accountant fell and broke her hip. The staff was soon talking of a curse. And the more they talked, the worse things got. Every day brought a new and terrifying event: a broken bone, a breast amputation, unexpected illness, murder, suicide in the family. To add to the litany of personal tragedies, the school building itself was starting to act strangely. Teachers arrived in the morning to find desks moved and papers strewn on the floor. A fluorescent light tube in the classroom ceiling burst, shattering shards of glass upon the heads of students. The entire administration had become paralyzed with fear. In whispered conversations in the teachers' lounge, they crystallized their collective terror and superstitiously personified the horrible chain of events as an attack by the devil himself. For the students, the most horrifying and traumatic event occurred just hours before Sister Martha phoned my brother. Sister Catherine, the school's most beloved and popular teacher, a vibrant young woman in her mid-20s with no known health issues, collapsed in her classroom and died in the throes of a grotesque and violent seizure before the eyes of her terrified pupils. Sister Martha was truly frightened and admitted frankly that she believed there was an evil presence in the school that needed to be exorcised. Mark confessed that exorcisms were a bit out of his line, but said that his brother was a ceremonial magician and a consecrated Gnostic bishop who had participated in several exorcisms in the past. Sister Martha asked Mark to please contact me and see if we might be able to come to the school that night. Mark called me and repeated as much as he could. As you might imagine, this was something that interested me very much. I asked him to call Sister Martha and tell her that we would both come and meet her, and if agreeable, stay the night in the building. I hung up the phone and sat for a moment wondering what I'd gotten myself into. How would I go about exorcising a school building? What exactly was it that I'd be exorcising? It's my firm conviction that all schools are haunted, especially old ones. Jesus. I haunt my old high school, junior high. All schools are haunted, especially high schools, which even under the most ideal circumstances are seething swamps of chaotic sexual energy created by decades of confused and tormented adolescents. Hell, I still haunt the halls of my old high school and junior high. In dreams and nightmares, I find myself running late to a class, unable to remember the time of day or the room number. Sometimes I find myself climbing the stairs or trapped somehow between the walls of unremembered hallways. High schools are ghost traps, even for the living. How much more intense the energy must be in a very old Catholic girls' high school, where year after year, decade after decade, its spooky icon festoon chambers are crammed with hundreds of girls all undergoing the mystifying metamorphosis into womanhood, all generating the immense and unpredictable psychokinetic energy that accompanies the unique female mystery of the first issue of Blood. It is with good reasons that when investigating hauntings and paranormal phenomena, the first question a professional investigator asks is there a menstruating girl or woman in the house? The premise of Stephen King's novel and film, Carrie, is not that much of an exaggeration. And so I was not at all surprised that the school building itself was capable of snagging and enraging a malignant force. What I didn't as yet know was exactly what that force was. Furthermore, I needed to figure out a magical formula, and what magical formula would be appropriate for an operation such as this. My mind was spinning too fast. I needed to pull myself together. I needed to ground myself. I needed to enter sacred space, a telephone booth to God, a place where the true omniscient me talks and the not so omniscient me listens. As it happened, I knew just such a place. And it was just a few steps from my telephone. I stripped off my clothes and stepped into the shower. There where the blessed hot water descends like the Holy Spirit from my crown to my toes, while my hands busied themselves with the automatic routine of the bath, while my brain runs on automatic pilot and my senses are engaged by familiar smells and sensations, my mind is released to listen to the great intelligence, of which mine own is merely the small and opaque reflection. I've composed entire songs in the shower. I've conceived books in the shower. Month after month, I figure out how I will pay the rent in the shower. And that afternoon, before the hot water started to turn cold, I knew precisely how I would go about exorcising Our Lady of Sorrows High School. And that's where we'll drop it for today. Yes, tomorrow's part 2 is the preparation. And I gotta just give you a teaser here because the epigram is from the movie The Exorcist. Father Damien says, I think it might be helpful if I gave you some background on the different personalities Regan has manifested. So far, I'd say there seem to be 3. And then Father Merrin, the exorcist, stops him and says, there is only one. Tomorrow we'll try to find out that one. So, continue to have a wonderful Mother's Day. I hope this set the stage for your Mother's Day activity. And we'll see you tomorrow morning, hopefully, same time. Until then, continue to be good to yourself and be good to each other. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will.